What if I told you that some of Hollywood's most brilliant minds were never celebrated simply because they showed up too early? Behind the glitz and timeless faces, there were actors, directors, and visionaries whose ideas didn't just push boundaries, they outran them. But Hollywood, ever terrified of what it can't control, looked the other way. Sometimes it mocked, sometimes it punished, and, more often, it simply erased. This isn't a story of underdogs who rose to glory. This is a story of artists who were right all along, but had to carry the weight of being right too soon. They spoke truths the world wasn't ready to hear. They lived lives that defied the rules. They created, believed, and resisted in a system designed to flatten individuality. From a glamorous starlet who pioneered modern wireless communication, to a Broadway legend erased for being both black and brilliant. From men who wore their politics on their sleeves, to women who dared to direct, write, and speak when they were told to smile and obey. This is a roll call of names that should have been legendary long before history caught up. Some of them died forgotten. Others lived long enough to see the world realize what it had missed. So here are 20 stars who weren't misunderstood. They were just mistimed. Fact has shown Hedy Lamarr, the beauty who invented the future. To Hollywood, she was just another imported beauty with hypnotic eyes and perfect cheekbones. But Hedy Lamarr wasn't interested in being worshipped, she wanted to be heard. While studios dressed her in glittering gowns and fed her vapid lines, Lamarr was secretly sketching complex engineering diagrams in her dressing room. In the 1,940 seconds, she co-invented a frequency-hopping communication system technology that would later become the backbone of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS. But the US Navy dismissed it, telling her to sell war bonds instead. She was too pretty to be taken seriously. Hollywood rewarded her with contracts, not credit. And for decades, she was remembered more for bathing nude in ecstasy than for changing the future of global communication. It wasn't until the late 1,990 seconds, decades after her prime, that scientists and historians finally acknowledged her patent as groundbreaking. But by then, Lamarr was living alone, forgotten, and bitter. She once said, "The brains of people are more interesting than the looks, I think." The tragedy? She was right, and the world realized it 50 years too late. Fact #2. Montgomery Clift, the tragedy of the first true method actor. Before Brando made it fashionable and De Niro made it mythic, Montgomery Clift was already doing it, living every line, inhabiting every silence. In the late 1,940 seconds, Clift shattered Hollywood norms with a kind of performance that felt too raw, too human, too fragile. While other leading men strutted, Clift ached. He made pain beautiful, vulnerability masculine, and silence devastating. Critics didn't know what to do with him, directors couldn't control him, and audiences weren't ready. He refused studio grooming, turned down macho roles, lived his truth in coded silence, an open secret in a town that required denial as currency. After a near-fatal car crash disfigured his face, Clift refused to hide. Instead, he acted through the pain, letting the camera capture what Hollywood wanted to crop out. Some say he destroyed himself. Others say Hollywood broke him. But what's certain is this: without Montgomery Clift, there would be no Brando, no Pacino, no Daniel Day-Lewis. He was the prototype too sensitive for his time, too honest for the screen, too early to be revered. And yet, he made every tortured second count. Fact #3. Anna May Wong, the star who refused to stay silent. She should have been a household name. She had the poise of Garbo, the sharpness of Hepburn, and the eyes that held 1,000 untold stories. But Anna May Wong was born the wrong ethnicity for Hollywood's golden pedestal. In the 1,920 seconds and 30 seconds, she dazzled in films like Shanghai Express, yet was repeatedly cast as the exotic villain, the seductive other, the tragic lotus flower. When The Good Earth, a film about Chinese farmers, was produced, Wong auditioned, only to be told she was too Chinese for the lead. The role went to a white actress in yellowface. Wong did the unthinkable. She spoke out. Loudly, publicly. She traveled to Europe and made films in Germany, where she was treated with more respect. She returned to America not as a submissive starlet, but as an icon of resistance. Still, Hollywood never forgave her for breaking the rules. She was offered crumbs, not crowns. Today, she's finally on US currency, a belated honor that would have meant more when she was still fighting for dignity, not legacy. Anna May Wong didn't just open doors, she banged on them until they cracked. But Hollywood only listened when the echoes became too loud to ignore. Fact #4. Ida Lupino, the woman who dared to direct. While Hollywood's leading ladies were being trained to cry on cue and pose for studio photographers, Ida Lupino was quietly rewriting the rules. An acclaimed actress in the 1,940 seconds, Lupino stunned the industry when she turned her back on stardom to step behind the camera at a time when women directors were virtually non-existent. She co-founded an independent production company, wrote scripts, directed controversial films, and tackled topics that the studios wouldn't touch: sexual assault, bigamy, mental illness. When asked why she focused on such taboo subjects, she replied simply, "Because someone had to." Studios scoffed. Executives called her difficult. Male directors dismissed her work as emotional. But she kept filming, often on shoestring budgets, often in secret, often with more guts than permission. It would take more than 70 years for the industry to recognize her as a pioneer. Today, she's hailed as the godmother of indie cinema. Ida Lupino didn't wait for permission to create. She just created. And the industry is still catching up. Fact #5. Eartha Kitt. The voice that made presidents uncomfortable. Eartha Kitt purred like no one else. Her voice could seduce a room and slice through hypocrisy in the same breath. She was a Broadway star, a singer of uncommon precision, and the most memorable Catwoman the 1,960 seconds ever knew. But in 1968, at a White House luncheon hosted by Lady Bird Johnson, Kitt made a fatal choice. She told the truth. When asked about the Vietnam War, she openly criticized U.S. involvement and said it was destroying the soul of America's youth. The room fell silent. The punishment was swift. The CIA opened a file on her. Bookings vanished. She was blacklisted from Hollywood and Broadway almost overnight. One comment, one moral stance cost her a decade of visibility. She moved to Europe, performed in French, sang in German, and waited for America to grow up. It eventually did. Decades later, Kitt returned, older but unbroken. She became a cult icon. Her defiance now seen as bravery. But the irony remains. It took a nation 30 years to admit that maybe the woman with the velvet voice was right all along. Fact #6. Paul Robeson. The Renaissance man America tried to erase. He was an actor, a singer, an athlete, a lawyer, and an intellectual. Paul Robeson wasn't just talented, he was seismic. He shook the stage and shattered expectations. But he was also political. And in mid-century America, that was a sin far greater than any scandal. Robeson used his fame to speak out against racism, colonialism, and fascism. He praised the Soviet Union's anti-racist rhetoric. He questioned the moral hypocrisy of America abroad, and he refused to stay silent, even as the blacklist swallowed his peers. For this, his passport was revoked, concert halls closed, films were pulled, his name was scrubbed from textbooks and public memory. At the height of his fame, he was rendered invisible. Only in recent years has his voice returned to the conversation. Museums name halls after him, actors cite him as influence. But few grasp the cost of what he endured. Paul Robeson didn't fall from grace. He was pushed because he demanded a better world, decades before it existed. Fact #7. Marlene Dietrich, too modern for her century. In a town built on fantasies, Marlene Dietrich became her own invention. She wore men's suits to black tie galas, kissed women on camera, and turned sexual ambiguity into high art, while most of Hollywood still clung to the illusion of moral decency. In the 1,930 seconds and 40 seconds, she wasn't just androgynous, she was defiant. Her entire image challenged the rigid gender codes of the era. She openly mocked Nazi ideology, rejected German propaganda offers, and became one of the first major stars to entertain Allied troops on the front lines. That patriotism didn't buy her safety. Behind closed doors, studios grew wary of her politics, her sexuality, her refusal to conform. She faded from the spotlight not because she lost her spark, but because the industry ran out of categories to fit her in. Decades later, icons like Bowie, Madonna, and Tilda Swinton would cite her as inspiration. Gender fluidity became art, and the world finally understood what Dietrich had been trying to say all along. But by then, she had already walked away, too modern for her century, too timeless to be forgotten. Fact #8. Rita Moreno, the talent they tried to box in. She won an Oscar, an Emmy, a Grammy, and a Tony, making her one of the very first EGOT winners in history. But even with those accolades, Rita Moreno couldn't escape the labels. In West Side Story 1961, she gave a searing performance that electrified audiences. But instead of opening doors, Hollywood typecast her further as the fiery Latina, the Spitfire, the ethnic beauty. She was offered role after role of maids, dancers, and sidekicks, often with fake accents and one-dimensional scripts. She refused. For years, she walked away from film altogether. "I didn't wait 20 years to become a stereotype," she once said. It was a lonely decision, but a principled one. And eventually, history caught up. Moreno returned on her own terms, decades later, as an icon and producer, demanding and finally receiving the respect she always deserved. Rita Moreno didn't just break ceilings. She waited until the house was willing to change. Fact #9. Sal Mineo, the star who lived too honestly. In Rebel Without a Cause, Sal Mineo became the face of troubled youth, aching, confused, magnetic. Off-screen, he was no different. But while Hollywood demanded masks, Mineo lived dangerously close to the truth. Whispers followed him throughout the 50 seconds and 60 seconds. His sexuality, his friends, his reluctance to play the game. He never officially came out, because in that era, doing so meant instant career death. But he also never lied. He lived in quiet defiance, taking roles in experimental theater, directing indie films, supporting young artists on the margins. By the 70 seconds, he was staging a comeback, finally free of the boy next door image. And then he was murdered in an alley, stabbed outside his apartment at age 37. The headlines focused on scandal. The industry moved on, but younger actors, gay, straight, and everything in between, remember. Today, Sal Mineo is seen not as a cautionary tale, but as a pioneer, someone who whispered the truth long before anyone dared to shout it. Fact #0. Dorothy Dandridge, the First and the Forgotten. She made history as the first Black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. For a moment, it seemed Dorothy Dandridge had broken the barrier, but the system never intended to keep it open. After her powerful performance in Carmen Jones, 1954, doors should have flown open. Instead, they slammed shut. Studios offered her demeaning roles or none at all. She refused to play servants, refused to be the tragic Black woman stereotype. And so, she waited and waited. Hollywood made her a symbol, not a working actress. Meanwhile, her white co-stars soared. Dandridge endured bankruptcy, heartbreak, and tabloid attacks. She died at 42, her brilliance dimmed not by time, but by exclusion. Only decades later did new generations discover her legacy. She wasn't just the first, she was also one of the best, and that makes her erasure even more unforgivable. Dorothy Dandridge didn't fail Hollywood. Hollywood failed her. Fact #9. Donald Sutherland, the rebel in the spotlight. Long before it was trendy for celebrities to speak out, Donald Sutherland turned his fame into a political weapon. In the Vietnam era, he didn't just oppose the war, he toured with Jane Fonda, co-created anti-war satire, and publicly condemned American foreign policy. Studios were nervous. Sponsors pulled funding. Some casting agents quietly blacklisted him. And yet, he persisted, choosing roles that challenged power structures and exposed moral gray zones. In Clute, Don't Look Now, Ordinary People, he played men at the edge, both literally and ideologically. He never chased stardom. He chased stories that mattered. That made him dangerous, in an era obsessed with bland heroes and quiet compliance. Now, in retrospect, Sutherland is revered as an actor who never played it safe, but for decades, he was simply labeled difficult. Sometimes being ahead of your time means being alone in your convictions. Donald Sutherland was never alone. He just didn't wait for the world to catch up. Fact #2. Thelma Ritter, the icon who refused to be pretty. In an industry addicted to glamour, Thelma Ritter refused to play the game. She wasn't thin, wasn't young, didn't wear designer gowns or hide her Brooklyn accent. She played maids, mothers, and busybodies, characters with grit, sarcasm, and humanity. And she stole every scene she was in. Ritter was nominated for 6 Oscars and never won once. Why? Because she didn't fit the mold of a leading lady. She didn't pretend. She didn't transform. She simply was funny, fierce, and real. In a studio system obsessed with illusion, she embodied truth. Her presence told audiences, you don't have to be beautiful to matter. Today, character actors are celebrated. Back then, they were afterthoughts. Thelma Ritter wasn't supporting cast. She was the spine holding the story upright. Fact #3. Rosalind Russell, the woman who made funny smart. In an era when women in comedy were expected to be ditzy, clumsy, or cute, Rosalind Russell redefined what it meant to be funny. She was fast-talking, razor-sharp, and always 2 steps ahead. In His Girl Friday, 1940, she didn't just match Cary Grant's wit, she outpaced him. As Hildy Johnson, she played a woman with ambition, edge, and a voice that refused to be softened for the male ego. Audiences loved her. Studios didn't know what to do with her. They wanted her in romantic dramas. She wanted to shatter stereotypes. Time and again, she chose roles that showed women as clever, self-reliant, unashamed of their minds. It wasn't until decades later that comedy fully opened its arms to women like her. Think Diane Keaton, Tina Fey, Phoebe Waller-Bridge. But Rosalind did it first, when no one had a blueprint. She didn't just earn the laugh, she earned the last word. Fact Hasson 4. John Garfield, the actor who fought the studio system. John Garfield didn't look like a matinee idol. He looked like the street, tough, wounded, unscripted. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. Trained in the group theater and steeped in method-style performance before it had a name, Garfield brought a rawness to screen that was unpolished but magnetic. He refused to sign the typical long-term studio contracts. He wanted freedom, artistic control, and better roles, not just for himself, but for others. For that, he was branded uncooperative. During the Red Scare, he refused to name names. He denied being a communist but refused to betray his friends. The industry turned its back. His health declined. He died of a heart attack at 39. The tragedy wasn't just his early death. It was how Hollywood punished independence. Today, stars have agents, freedom, production companies. John Garfield was fighting for all of that in the 1,940 seconds. Fact Hasson 5. James Baldwin, the writer Hollywood couldn't contain. He was never a studio darling. He never wanted to be. James Baldwin was a black, gay, outspoken intellectual who told stories about America's deepest wounds. He wrote novels, essays, speeches, and scripts Hollywood refused to produce. When The Welcome Table and Giovanni's Room were pitched for adaptation, executives balked. Too political, too queer, too honest. So Baldwin bypassed the system. His books became Bibles for those searching for truth in a country of denial. His voice, unapologetically black, unapologetically human, echoed through generations. Only now is Hollywood scrambling to adapt his work. Barry Jenkins, Raoul Peck, new documentaries. But Baldwin saw the future long ago. He knew cinema could liberate or lie, and he demanded it tell the truth. James Baldwin didn't want fame. He wanted revolution on film. We just didn't have the courage to follow him. Fact Hashanix, Harry Belafonte, the star who used fame as ammunition. To many, he was the king of Calypso, a voice that brought day to America's radios. But Harry Belafonte wasn't here to entertain the comfortable. He was here to confront them. As one of the first black artists to achieve crossover fame in the 1,950 seconds, Belafonte could have played it safe. Instead, he marched with Martin Luther King Jr., funded civil rights movements, criticized U.S. foreign policy, and even turned down film roles that perpetuated stereotypes. This made him powerful and polarizing. Government agencies monitored him. Studios distanced themselves. He was branded a radical, his screen opportunities dwindling despite his immense popularity. Still, he never stopped. He mentored new activists. He produced films that told untold stories. He believed that fame meant nothing if you didn't use it. Today, celebrity activism is a brand. Back then, it was a risk. And Belafonte took it over and over again. Fact Hasson 7. Lillian Gish, the silent star who fought for artistic control. Long before the auteur theory was born, Lillian Gish was already demanding it. Known as the First Lady of American cinema, Gish was more than a wide-eyed ingenue of silent films. She worked with D.W. Griffith, but refused to be his puppet. She negotiated contracts, controlled edits, suggested scripts. She believed film was not just entertainment, it was art. And art needed protection from profit-hungry studios. As talkies arrived and youth took over, she was pushed aside. But she never stopped fighting for preservation, integrity, and respect for actors as creative forces, not just pretty faces. She gave lectures into her 90s. She called out sexism and ageism before either had a name. She was part actress, part archivist, part visionary. In an era when actresses were discarded like yesterday's headlines, Lillian Gish built a legacy that refused to vanish with the silence. Fact Hasson 8. Diana Sands, the trailblazer Broadway refused to celebrate. Diana Sands should have been the next great dramatic actress of her generation. Her performance in A Raisin in the Sun was electric, layered, fierce, devastating. She held the stage with poise that outshone her co-star. She broke color barriers on Broadway and took roles that no black actress had ever been offered. But Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. The few roles available to black women were one-dimensional, and she refused them. She aimed higher, dreamed wider. In 1973, she was cast opposite James Earl Jones in a romantic comedy. A black woman as a love interest, not a maid, not a martyr. But cancer took her before filming began. She was 39. Hollywood moved on. Her name faded. But actors who followed Viola Davis, Angela Bassett, stood on her shoulders. Diana Sands didn't just break ground. She left footprints that others would one day follow. Fact Hassananine. Gloria Swanson, the producer who funded herself. Most remember Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond, the delusional silent star in Sunset Boulevard. But what many forget is that Swanson wasn't acting. She was warning. Before that film became legend, Swanson was already a trailblazer. In the 1,920 seconds, while studios tightly controlled every actor's image, she founded her own production company. She selected scripts, hired crews, raised funds. She even teamed up with Erich von Stroheim to make Queen Kelly, a film so provocative it was shut down mid-production. Studios called her reckless, critics called her indulgent, but in truth, she was a woman demanding creative autonomy decades before it was considered acceptable. Her career suffered, power punished her, but when she re-emerged in Sunset Boulevard, delivering a performance both haunting and prophetic, it was Hollywood's guilt staring into the mirror. Gloria Swanson wasn't a fading relic. She was the future that came too soon and left too soon. Fact #20. Roddy McDowall, the actor who became Hollywood's memory. He could have been just another child star turned character actor. Instead, Roddy McDowall became something far more vital, the unofficial archivist of Hollywood's soul. From How Green Was My Valley to Planet of the Apes, he moved through genres and decades with quiet grace. But behind the scenes, he did something few others even considered. He documented. He photographed his co-stars, recorded private moments, collected lost reels, preserved screen tests and rare prints that studios deemed disposable. He wasn't chasing nostalgia, he was protecting history. While execs bulldozed the past to make room for the next blockbuster, McDowall was building an invisible museum, one frame at a time. Today, many of the most important images and film relics from the Golden Age exist because he kept them, stored them, valued them. Roddy McDowall didn't just act in Hollywood, he saved it from forgetting itself. Bonus fact: Barbara Payton, the cautionary tale they wanted you to forget. She was supposed to be the next big thing, glamorous, blonde, and impossibly magnetic. Barbara Payton had the face of a starlet and the raw edge of a survivor. But she wanted more than to pose. She wanted to live on her own terms. In the early 1,950 seconds, studios adored her looks but hated her defiance. She refused to sign long-term contracts, dated who she pleased, spoke her mind. Her messy love triangle with two actors, one violent, one married, became tabloid poison. Hollywood turned its back. She spiraled, roles vanished, money disappeared, addiction followed. By the time she was 35, she was arrested for prostitution. The same headlines that once called her a blonde bombshell now mocked her fall. But behind the mugshots was a brutal truth. Payton had been chewed up by an industry that wanted sex appeal without sex autonomy, a system that thrived on fantasy but punished women for being human. She died at 39, broke and alone, no redemptive arc, no comeback story. But maybe she doesn't need one. Maybe the point is this: Barbara Payton was never broken. She was honest in a town that demanded lies, and that's what made her dangerous.